Hey everybody, welcome to Answers with Joe Live, where today I'm going to be sharing some clips from the podcast that I did with my buddy Greg over at Greg's Garage, the YouTube channel Greg's Garage. The link for that down in the description. Go check it out. He does some really cool stuff. Greg and I have been friends for a couple of years now. We are actually part of I guess you would call it a mastermind group. We meet once a week, him and me and a few other guys, and we're all YouTubers, but we also are all entrepreneurs and stuff like that. And it's good times. And he's a good buddy of mine, and I was glad to have him on here. So I want to just really quickly, for those of you who are watching live, apologize and thank you for your patience. I don't know what happened. I somehow managed to schedule 3 of these live streams at the same time. I honestly have no idea how that happened, but it happened. Seeing some people joining in, Louis Genie, new glasses. These are not new glasses. These are like 10 years old. I've had these forever. They're on the channel art. Have you never seen my? Anyway, it's fine. No, these are not new glasses. I've had them forever. But we talked on this podcast about the fact that Greg is, first of all, he's an architect. That's his day job. As if that's not interesting enough. He also, on his channel, he does a lot of design and fabrication type stuff. Like, he actually built with his own hands a CNC machine. And I didn't know what that was before I met him. And he actually told me what it is on the podcast, what that CNC stands for, and I've already forgotten. But it's basically like a mechanized drill that you can computer program in what you want this drill to do. It's a subtractive device is what he called it. So you have like a block of wood or plastic or metal or whatever, and this drill will go through and create a design out of it, a 3D design that you have done in the computer. He actually built that machine himself, which is insane to me. I don't know how a human being does that. He also renovates cars on his channel. He builds guitars. That wasn't supposed to rhyme. But he's a really interesting guy, and we talk about some really fun stuff. And so I'm just going to share a few clips from that conversation. The link to the podcast down in the description below. Please check it out. If you are not subscribed to my podcast in Google Play or iTunes or Stitcher or any of those places, please do. I've been trying to be a lot more regular about them. I also share audio versions of my videos so you can listen to them in your car while you're working out or whatever you're trying to do, running, escaping your significant other, whatever it is you do. So the first clip that I want to share, Greg talks about what I'll just say the permanence of architecture as an art form. You know, there's a lot of art that we do that to display our creativity, to share with the world, to enact change, whatever it is, for whatever reason that we do art. But architecture is something that has a lasting impact for decades upon decades upon decades. And he talks about how the weight of that, sort of the importance and significance of that, factors into his work that he does as an architect. I just thought this was a really interesting point, and I'll kind of add my spin on it at the end, but let me go ahead and share this with you real quick. Now, before I share it, I do want to let you know we had some technical problem that I don't quite know what happened, but there's like the sound drops out here and there. Hopefully it's not too bad. I just want to give you a fair warning before you guys all jump in the comments and let me know. I'm well aware. So here you go. This is Greg talking about the permanence of architecture.
It's kind of funny. I design buildings and our horizon is 50 to 80 years.
Yeah.
And like right now, we are starting to see the demolition of some of the buildings that were built in the 20s because they are at the end of their useful life. Mm-hmm. You can put money into them and rehab them. And some buildings are worth doing that because there's a historical significance or something like that. But other buildings, truly, there's no real historical significance. They were built in the 20s, they've lived their life, and now we're taking them. So almost 100 years later, we're taking these buildings down. Anyone who is involved in the construction or design of that building is long gone.
Yeah.
And I'm designing buildings, and we tell people all the time, you know, our horizon, our second one is the 80. So we figure in 50 years, you'll be doing what we would say are major renovations. In 80 years, you might be looking take the buildings down. Well, in 50 years, I'm going to be 93 years old. And in 80 years, I'm pretty sure I'll be pushing up daisies. So the things that I'm doing now are going to outlive me. Yeah. And, everybody wants to leave their mark or leave something behind. And everybody, it's a little bit different. Do they want to affect humanity? Do they want to raise kids? Or, what do they want to do to leave behind? And I'm leaving behind a series of buildings. And it's kind of surreal sometimes. That whole profession is that. And I would tell you, and I don't want to brag about being an architect, that's not what this is about, but it's such a different profession in that when I draw a line on a piece of paper, 2 years later, that line becomes a physical thing. Someone else makes it, and I show up on a job site and I say, I remember putting that line on a piece of paper. Now this thing is in place till after I die because I put that line on a piece of paper. It brings a different weight to what you do. You really think about these lines that I'm drawing are very, very serious things.
So the little spin that I want to put on that is that, and we talked about this in the podcast, so I'm just kind of like sharing what happens next, is that I talked about filmmaking and screenwriting specifically, which is something that I do. He talked about how, he does the squiggles and the lines and the stuff on blueprints and he makes these designs, and then years later he sees this thing actually going up and he sees it in real life and how amazing that is and how permanent that is. And I compared that to the similar sensation that I get as a screenwriter, where I'll see a story or a scene or characters, dialogue, the whole thing. I'll see all of it in my head, write it out, and then years later, through all the various processes that films get made, I'll wind up on set and I'll see people reading the lines, and it's coming to life. And then later it's up on a screen. And while a movie screen is not permanent in the way that architecture is, you can still go and watch Audrey Hepburn in a movie. She died many years ago. So in a way, she's kind of living on. So we both talked about how filmmaking and architecture are kind of both, in art in general, but those two specifically, are ways that we can create things that live beyond our lifespan. So that was an interesting little, tie-in there that I wasn't expecting when we started talking. So that was cool. The next clip that I want to share, some of you have already asked about in the live chat, or this has already been brought up, is the question of how come 3D printers have not been more commonplace. Why don't we all have 3D printers in our house? Like, I've got a printer right there where I can print out on paper. Why can't I just go, fabricate something, especially since they've been around for as long as they have? That was something that I was curious about. So I asked him about it, and I thought he had a really great response. So here's what he had to say about that.
It feels like they first started talking about the whole 3D printing thing like 10 years ago, and I really thought they'd be more ubiquitous by now. Like, it's still something that seems like, makers like yourself and people who are kind of crafty are into it, but why is it not just like an appliance that we all have in our homes, where if I wanted a bowl, instead of going to the store, I could just order it, the schematic online, just download it and just print out a bowl?
That's a great question. And I think some of the early printer guys called them RAP machines, and that stood for rapid reproduction, meaning the machine could print another machine, And in fact, one of the guys who's a subscriber to my channel, and I watch him as well, he sent me a bag of 3D point and said, here's all the pieces you need to build a 3D printer. Just add motors and a few other little doodads. And it's like, oh, that's really cool. And it wound up that I could buy this kit that I bought cheaper than I could piecemeal out the things that I had left to buy. Mm-hmm. But I think the reality is they're much more difficult to control than what people think. So people get them, and they realize that the first print that comes out isn't always going to be perfect. You really do have to tweak them. You have to, it's an inexact science a little bit to get clean parts that come out. And I'll go back to this. So I picked one of these up and I said this one was no good. Can you see how it's screwed up here on the top?
Vaguely, but you're very small on my screen.
Oh yeah. But compared to this one that has a nice clean logo, this one didn't print right. So this is garbage. And I'm pretty good at 3D printing, and I still get garbage parts every once in a while. If we think of an example of something in your house that's plastic that might break, that you could download a model of and print, I'm thinking of like the toilet paper holder in your bathroom, right? The part squeezes together with a spring. So to replace the one that you have, things have to fit together, right? You know, the other piece that you have, the receiver, and all those kinds of things. So what are the chances the one that's online that you can download it actually works for that? I don't know. I think that's really what it is. When you look at that, very much like, think of the last year of your life. How many things have broken in your house that you would replace by 3D printing if you had a 3D printer? It's probably pretty few. Mm. And when you do need one, it's really nice to be able to just pop it out of the printer. But in all reality, you're not going to need that every day. You're not going to probably need that every week. But if you're creating things that don't exist, it is something that you might use every day. But like I said, I think that pool of people who are going to create new things is relatively small. And that's why you don't see them everywhere.
So the consensus is that on a personal scale, in terms of that being a household item, we're not quite there yet. Who knows if we ever will be. And I think he made a really good point. You know, back when 3D printers first became a thing, that was the first sort of stories that I heard, was that someday we'll be able, instead of going out shopping, you'll just go online, and if you want a thing, you'll just press the button, and then your little 3D printer over here will just boop, create the thing. And the point that he was making was that the kind of stuff that you can make with a 3D printer is not the kind of stuff that you need all that often. So it's not a piece of utility that's that much utility, I guess. But for big manufacturing processes, for creative, for makers, for prototyping designs, it does serve a really good purpose. And we talked more about that in the podcast, and we probably could have talked about it a lot further. I think that's a really interesting point that he made there. And I think that in terms of us being able to create new technologies, to break through with new ideas, even in the medical field, you know, they're talking about 3D printing organs someday. That's a huge thing, and you might be hearing something about that in my next video. Hint, wink, hint. But anyway, on that note, though, on the topic of what you can do on a manufacturing level, on an industrial level with 3D printing, 3D design, he started talking about his trip that he took recently to Boston, to the Maker Studio from AutoCAD. I believe that's who it was. They have this thing called the Maker Studio, and they've got all the newest, latest, and greatest really cool fabrication and 3D stuff. And I was only able to pull out just a little nugget of it for this. It's an hour-long conversation, so there's plenty of it there. But he talks a little bit here about how these new 3D design elements or 3D design processes are changing what's possible with architecture, and how it's not just in a design perspective, but also from an economics perspective, which is really cool. So I'm going to share that clip right now.
It was a machine that would take coil of steel. And are you familiar with construction with 2x4s? You'd call them a stud, right? A 2x4 stud that makes up a wall. You put them every 16 inches on center, and you put drywall on. Well, in commercial construction, you use what are called metal studs. Same shape, same size. They're just made out of sheet metal, and they form a C. Right. Much lighter, much less expensive, and very straight, and all these kinds of things. Well, they would take these coils of sheet metal, and they could put them through this machine, and it would come out with this steel stud on the other end. Okay, that machine exists. That's how they manufacture steel studs. Nothing new, right? Mm-hmm. But they added an automation and a computer-controlled part that could do any stud that you did. At angles, it could cut it to length. It could put holes in it for other things to happen. It could figure out in the computer, when you drew a shape, how many studs you needed, what size, what angles they needed to be cut at, and how they could be fastened together to create any structure that you could come up with.
Wow.
So as an architect, it's funny. If we design a wall that's curved, the price of that wall goes up exponentially because people are afraid of making that curve and how much time it might take them. When you have a machine like this that does not care what the input is, all it's doing is sending sheet metal down and it's moving it however. You take that cost factor completely out of the equation. I think as a designer really opens us up to new possibilities because now we're not fighting the budget to get what we want because people are afraid of doing things. Fear is a huge deterrent to designers like me being able to do what they want to do, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tell you from the machining end of things, if I were going to machine one of these traditionally with a guy on a manual machine, it would take him forever to get all of these things. It would cost a fortune. But on a CNC machine, the CNC doesn't care. It just moves in whatever shape you want it to move in. So you can make things that are complex like this without having to pay that huge penalty. And I think, to kind of tie it all together, I think that's the next frontier, is back to the designs of the 50s and 60s that were very, let's call it bulbous and imaginary and having really sexy curves on every car that went around the corner. That all went away because of budgets and money. And we're bringing it back because the machinery is allowing us to do it.
So, pretty cool stuff. I wanted to respond just really quickly to a conversation that I'm seeing in the live chat where people are asking, or conversing, I can speak, about what's the long-term longevity of 3D printed building materials. And I don't have the specific answer to that, but I do want to just clarify, when I'm talking about the building materials and when Greg was talking about building materials through these like 3D processes, it wasn't so much the additive 3D printing like you see in the 3D printer where it's like adding on and layer after layer. It's really more of a subtractive process where you have a roll of steel, like plate steel, and then etching out through lasers or hydro cutting through it and creating different shapes of objects through that process. Anyway, so it's I guess the answer there would be the strength of steel because it's steel. Anyway, so the final clip I want to share kind of takes this whole 3D thing and the computer-aided design thing to the next level. We start talking about AI and how AI is changing what designers are able to do, not just from giving ideas and design elements that a human being just wouldn't think of, but also from a time-saving aspect. I could go on and talk a little further about it, but Greg talks about it in this clip, so let me just go right into the clip and you can see for yourself. Here we go.
So there was a video that I watched. I want to say it was a TED Talk. It might not have been TED, but it was something like that, some kind of smart person on stage talking. And they were talking about this new design that incorporated AI. So it was like the computer was working with a designer to design a car or something like that. And some of the stuff that it was coming up with just looked alien, but it actually was creating an extremely strong structure with a lot less material, and kind of like what you were just saying, like just finding a new innovative way to design things that would get a better result out of it.
Well, I think what's interesting is, as a designer, where we are at technologically. So Google can read at like a 6th grade level, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So a 6th grader, if you give them a list of design parameters, they can understand what you want. If, let's just for argument's sake, say I want a 6th grader to make a chair. I can say, It has to hold 250 pounds. It has to have a seat capable of supporting a butt of this size, however you want to say it. And it needs to fit the human dimension of a full-grown adult. And, suspend them, let's just say 18 inches above the earth.
Yeah.
You can now put that into design software, and design software can interpret what you want, and it can iterate design options for you. So you put in the parameters, 3 legs, 4 legs, 18 inches above the ground, 250 pounds. And it is going to start iterating, boom, 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 boom. And as a designer, instead of starting with a blank piece of paper, now you've got 50 options, and you look at them and you go, well, I like these 3. Now we can put the human touch on that, and we can say, people aren't going to like the look of this because it's leaning funny, or the legs don't come in perpendicular, whatever the criteria is that you don't like. But the computer can do that first step, and it can do it in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. It's not 10 or 15 minutes of you sitting there sketching 100 ideas, which one of our typical writers brainstorm, and generally business people brainstorm things. As designers, one of the tasks that we do all the time is we generate 50 concepts whenever we, and it's a way past the first easy ones, get into the hard ones. Well, then when you get into the first layer of hard ones, then you develop a second or third layer of even more depth. And when you get to that 50th idea, you've got something, right? There's some substance there that isn't just a knee-jerk reaction.
Right.
And the computer can do that in 10 seconds.
So you're kind of leapfrogging ahead to the more interesting stuff, and then put your own touch on it.
Yeah.
So, really cool stuff. That's the last clip that I have for you. I will just say, go check out the podcast. We talk at great length about all these things. And I want to thank Greg for doing the podcast. We will probably be talking to him again at some point. He's a super interesting guy. He actually, we didn't even really get into his guitar making. He has a background in music. In fact, usually in our little masterminds, he's like playing on a guitar while we're talking. And he played with some band and toured the country with all these major acts. Like, he's got some crazy stories. I think he actually he played in a band, but he was also a roadie at one point. Maybe I'm saying that wrong. The guy's lived a life, let's just say. And but he also has a studio called Skyscraper Guitars, where he builds guitars, but he also builds little pieces, like little, I don't know what to call them. Accompanying things for guitars to help you to maintain and take care of your guitar. Anyway, little stuff that he makes there in his garage, and it's cool stuff. So links to all that down in the description below. Definitely go check it out. If you're into guitars, if you're into music, he's got some cool stuff to share. I would stick around and answer some questions and make this a little bit longer, but I'm having some technical issues with my computer right now. My thing over here is like way behind you guys. I don't know why it keeps stalling, but I really want to thank everybody who has joined. Bale Thompson has been adding a lot to the conversation. I appreciate that. Bruce Langston is talking quite a bit about graphene, different topic, but I guess not really, because we're talking about manufacturing and that's all a thing. But anyway, I saw Shantia Dykes on there, who's been a big supporter for a long time, and it's cool to see you. We had about 80 people watching total, which is really cool. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and keep it a little bit short this time. I really want to thank you guys for joining. Definitely go check out the podcast. I got a video coming out on Monday. Should I tell you what it is? I'm not going to tell you what it is. But it does involve, like I said, 3D printing human organs comes up. So you can just let your imagination go wild from there. But anyway, thank you guys so much. And I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope that you listen to the podcast and you enjoy what is being said there. It's all some really interesting stuff. It was actually way more interesting than I thought. The future's crazy, people, and we're living through it. So enjoy it. I will see you guys next time. Thanks a lot for joining. Love you guys. Take care.